Thank you for joining us this evening for the Artists Exchange, a group created by and for artists to share new work, ideas, resources, and opportunities monthly over a glass of wine or tea as you prefer. So grab your beverage and join us as we discover the work of two eco artists, Deborah Kennedy and Shannon Amidon, who are showing in the gallery through this Sunday. I'm Shelley Rugg, the Executive Director at Gallery Route 1, and for our presentation today, we ask that you please stay muted unless we ask you to unmute. For best viewing, select Speaker View from the top right corner of the Zoom viewing screen. And we want you to know that we are recording today's presentation for future viewing on our website and YouTube channel. And the Zoom event from last month is now up on our website if you'd like to check that out. Now, please join me in welcoming our host, Pamela Blotner, an artist, educator, and curator who lives and works in the Bay Area. She has worked as a sculptor illustrator for the Houston Zoo in Houston, Texas, and the Leatherback Trust Conservation Organization, and as an artist designer for Human Rights Watch, Physicians for Human Rights, and the UC Berkeley Human Rights Center. Blotner's sculpture and drawings have been exhibited in Europe, Asia, Africa, and the United States. She has taught at a number of universities throughout the U.S. She is co-curator and founder with Me Preckler of Artists Beyond Boundaries. Please welcome Pamela Blotner.
I also model for Vogue magazine. She forgot to say that. Okay, well, we're very happy tonight to be able to introduce you to Shannon Amidon and Deborah Kennedy, two independent artists who make up half of Terra Art Collective. The other two being Michelle Gueux, I think I've got that right, and Leah J. And they are, as Shelley said, ecological artists, and they focus on primarily on bringing the earth back into sync with the human beings that have gotten it off track. So rather than stumble around, I'm going to let you guys answer the question that was the first on my mind, which is, you hear people talk about environmental art and eco art. How are they different?
Well, I think they're pretty similar. It just kind of also depends on who you're talking to. For me, it depends on if it's kind of land art and it's art based in the land using the earth, or it's artwork about the nature and climate change or things like that. I think for me, they could be kind of used interchangeably. I'm not sure how Deborah might think about that.
Yeah, I think that there's something to that. There's been kind of an evolution, and some of the early land art was pretty destructive to the environment, and we sadly. The Harrisons have passed, and I had contact with him just before he passed, and he sent me his book. It was so cool. But they really started eco art, and they would have galleries that had, grass growing in it and pools of fish, and they were really investigating how ecosystems work. So I think they were really the ones who started this real focus on how the threats to our ecosystems, and trying to come to a deeper understanding of how ecosystems work. They're very complex, and investigating that. It did some wonderful, one of my favorite pieces in Europe, a new building was going in, and there was a meadow that was going to get torn up. They took the meadow and they put it on top of the building and preserved this whole meadow. So they just did some wonderful inventive work, and better known in Europe than here. But I think they were sort of the progenitors of a lot of this movement. And just like any movement, people go in a lot of different directions with a lot of different, focus on different issues.
Well, I'll take you a little bit deeper and say, for those who haven't studied this, tell us a little bit about the Harrisons.
Well, they were a couple. They worked together. They were both artists, and they worked together as a couple. And as I say, they did just some very inventive work, and people had never seen anything like that. They'd walk into a gallery and there were these tanks of fish, and they'd go like, "Why is that art? What are you talking about?" And they really helped make a bridge. They did a lot of work where they did mapping, and they would come to a deeper understanding of various ecosystems, because they did this very scientific and accurate kind of mapping, would have those up on the walls. And then they would just go into these different areas of inquiry and do pretty large scale shows. And then also these large scale actions, like taking a whole meadow up and putting it on the roof of a building.
Good, good. So we can find out information on them and possibly a few books.
For sure.
Okay, great. Well, I also looked up a little bit of information on you, and one quote that I particularly liked was that you focus on multimedia works, or rather, your multimedia works are thematically focused on the need for a new ecological and global practice, one which satisfies human needs while fostering a vitally protective natural environment. So just as you said, to shorten, not only is it celebrating the environment, not only is it making people aware, but it's trying to fix certain things. And I think that that's going to be very interesting to hear you talk about. Shannon is an artist who lives in the Pacific Northwest, where she is, in her own words, an artist, beekeeper, environmental steward, wonder seeker, lover of insects, books, and plants. And I think that's it.
Thank you. Yeah, so thank you, Shelley and Pamela, for both having me here today. I try to keep my intros kind of short and sweet, and everybody can go and on my website and read my long bio of everything. But I feel like I like to give people a little bit more knowledge about who I am and what I'm passionate about, and the environment and bees and insects and things like that. So kind of keep my bio like that. So we could go ahead and put up my slideshow. And the first shot you're going to see here is of my artwork installed at Gallery Route 1 for the Terra Art Collective Ecolibrium exhibit. And I'm very proud of this exhibit. Terra Art Collective, as was mentioned earlier, are 4 female artists, Deborah Kennedy, Leah J., Michelle Gu, and myself. And we've been meeting over the past few years through the pandemic and really diving into these issues that are important to us and ways that we can share our concern and teach people and other things. So we're really thrilled to be able to have this platform at Gallery Route 1. So you can switch to the next slide. And this is kind of just a close-up of these images. So I am very interested in insects and all the things that insects do. And that's kind of one of the areas that I really like to specialize in and share information to people to kind of give them a different perspective of insects and how important they are. They're so small and they're feared a lot. So people kind of either write them off or are afraid of them. So my goal is to try and draw people in with their beauty or their mystery or how interesting they are or how important they are for us in the environment. So these 6 paintings are encaustic paintings, and they're 12 by 48 inches. And each one of them is a different insect wing blown up over like 1,000%. So the first wing we have is a cicada, then a Dobson fly. I have a dragonfly, the mosquito, owl fly, and a bee. So these are all just kind of different ways to present and really give people like a close up view of insect wings. And you can go to the next slide. So my formative years were spent in nature, and it's really informs a lot of my work. And it was kind of an escape and a sanctuary for me. So that I really feel like is what's influenced my art over the years. And this past April and May, I had an exhibit on Vashon Island, the Vashon Center for the Art, called Agents of Nature. And it was all focused on insects. And I created these big insect wings in a large installation of 70-piece hexagon installation. And you can go to the next slide. We'll get a close-up view of this installation. So this installation is specifically about pollinators. And while the majority of it is insects, there's other important creatures in there, such as bats and moths and birds, because they're all important pollinators to our ecosystems. But I also want, that's something that everyone really knows about, the insects. But there's also so many other things that they do that's important. They're a huge part of the food chain. They process waste for us. They're just such an important keystone creature that I don't think people really realize what would happen if we didn't have them anymore. And they are declining very, very rapidly. And so my medium is encaustic, which is beeswax. And that's how I actually got into beekeeping, because I really wanted to learn more about where my medium was coming from. And it just was really been a very satisfying and wonderful way to dive even deeper to learning about these insects. So these are all hexagon pieces. Like they start like 2 by 2 to like 8 by 10, kind of all in this swarm here. And we can go to the next slide. These were also pieces at that exhibit. And this was me trying to break out a little bit and break out of the traditional format of painting on rectangular squares. So I had a lot of fun creating these, again, these insect wings in a different way, where I worked with a woodworker, and I drew up the plans in Illustrator, and he cut out these wings for me in a special CNC router machine. And each wing is covered in a different material. So the first wing on the right is a bee wing, and it's covered in crushed pyrite. And then there's 2 cicada wings. And the first one has hundreds of pieces of vintage paper, letters, and maps dipped in wax and attached to the wood. The next cicada wing is got almost 1,000 beetle wing shields on it. So they're real beetle wings. And these are sustainably harvested. And a lot of people in Southeast Asia eat these insects and use them for food for animals. So a lot of the families sell the wing shields to help their livelihood. And then the last wing is a dragonfly wing, and it's purely encaustic with a lot of writing on it. And writing is another really important part of my process. And I really love the feelings that handwriting and text evokes. And I don't want people to necessarily read the words. I want to kind of be a mystery, and people to kind of come up with their own interpretation of what each of the sayings or the words together kind of mean. So we can move to the next slide. And this is maybe more of my traditional encaustic paintings. These are, 30 by 40-inch encaustic paintings, again, featuring different insects, moths and butterflies a lot. And I find in dragonflies, I find for me, this is a way to like pull people in. It's kind of, if you will, like the safer insects, the ones that people are not as afraid of. So if I kind of draw them in with this beauty and this aesthetic, but then once I have their attention, really kind of try to convey the urgency and the importance of preserving the insect life that we have by not using pesticides or herbicides. Things like even like our lawns are just a nightmare. This monoculture of lawns that people spend millions of dollars on, like fertilizing and cutting, and it's terrible, and it really takes away a large population of the insects. And you can go to the next slide. This was an installation I did several years ago in Palo Alto, actually. I'm originally from the Bay Area before I moved up to Oregon. And this is at Pacific Art League in Palo Alto. And it's a big installation. This is 300 pieces, and it's meant to discuss the monarchs and the monarch migration, and how it's 99% of monarchs have disappeared. And although this past year or so, the numbers have gone up, which is fantastic, it's still not anywhere close to where it was. And monarchs are really important to me because I did grow up in the Bay Area in the foothills of San Jose. And I remember as a child, like the monarch migration, every year they would fly through, and it was really a magical thing to experience as a child. But every year there were less and less monarchs, and it was strange. And at the time I didn't understand, because I was, between like 6 and 8 years old, but it was a really fond memory for me. So now, we don't see any monarchs migrating. You sometimes go to Capitola or Natural Bridges and see them, but you don't see them flying through like you used to, 20 years ago. You can go to the next slide. And this is just a close-up of them. So you can see on each of these discs, they're wooden discs that I created, and I painted them with encaustic paint. And then I put images, blown up images of the monarch wings with some other, images of like trying to convey like eggs and flight and things like that. And the big hole in the center, represents the missing parts of the monarch population. So with encaustic, it's molten beeswax and resin, and it's important for me to really use as many sustainable materials in my process as possible. So the wood I use is FSC certified. All of the wax is natural. I use natural earth pigments and try my hardest not to contribute more, as we talk about in our exhibit, Ecolibrium, like putting more stuff out into the world. I want to do that in a very thoughtful way. And if I could do that in a way with materials that are repurposed or recycled or harvested or created sustainably, that's also very important to me. And so I moved up to the Pacific Northwest about 3 years ago, and we were very fortunate to be able to find a really amazing piece of land right outside of Portland. And you can move to the next slide, and I'll tell you about my latest project. It's called the Verdancy Project, and it has to do with this land that I'm on and fostering this land and sharing this land. And so it has a creek and a forest and a woodland, and it's just amazing. And it's a really special place. So what I've done is I've created an artist residency program for artists who are connected to the earth and ecology and the environment to come out and use this space. And, it's much more than I could ever use by myself. So I want to invite others to use the resources and be able to stay here and create and research. And it's been really wonderful because we've had artists from all over the US and Canada. A couple of weeks ago, we had a field biologist who is also an artist come out, and she, studies bees actually and works in the field, but she also makes art. And we have artists who make natural pigments from the rocks in the creek. So this is an ongoing project for me. And we also do kind of community art projects, but it really influences my art practice as well. And it's been so satisfying to be able to work with these other artists and have them influence my artwork as well. And Michelle Gu, one of the other members of the Terra Art Collective, was one of our first residents last year. And she created some, on the bottom kind of right, these little rocks, this rock with these little sticks. She created these in our creek, and it was really wonderful to have her part of that as well. And hopefully all the other members of the Terra Art Collective could come out and join me too. So thank you very much for having me. And I really enjoy this exhibit at Gallery Route 1.
Thank you, Shannon. That was great. And I know I have a million questions, so I can't wait till the audience gets a chance to ask you. But in the meantime, let's move over and see see what Deborah has to say. And she also is a nature child. She grew up on a farm in Connecticut, swimming in lakes, climbing trees, building forts among, as she says, the boulders dropped by the last glaciers. So we get some history in here too. As a young adult, she drove to California and has lived there ever since, backpacking in the Sierras and charging around on horses. After earning her degree, she pursued an art career, creating installations, wall work, and writing as well, writing her book, Nature Speaks, Art and Poetry for the Earth. Now, is that book available at the gallery, Deborah?
Yes, it is. It's on sale there, and I'm doing it as a fundraiser for the gallery. So if you buy a copy of it, you'll be supporting the gallery as well.
Great, thank you. And I understand you have an installation, Library of Life, that they can also see. And it offers a sanctuary for visitors to contemplate today's ecological challenges. And it features altered books that you have made. And reminds us both of the beautiful creatures we have and those that we are losing. So that said, I would like to ask you to share your work.
Terrific. And I'd also like to start off with a thank you to you, Pamela and Shelley, for making this opportunity for artists to be able to reach out in a new way, you know, to contact a larger audience. So thanks so much for that. And, you know, we mentioned the Harrisons, and I ran over and I got their book, which is enormous. Oh gosh, maybe that's not going to work with my screen, but it's called The Time of Force Majeure. And a force majeure is an overwhelming force like war. So they're describing the environmental situation as a force majeure that we must cope with. So it's Helen Mayer Harrison and Newton Harrison were the artists that I was kind of attributing the beginnings of eco art to in a large degree. So I'd like to start off, Shelley, maybe let's get the slides going there. Great, let's go to the first slide. So I'm starting off with the installation that's currently up at Gallery Route 1. What a wonderful, Gallery Route 1 is one of the really long-lasting artist-run galleries, and such a wonderful anchor to the whole community. This is Sanctuary, and I wanted to create kind of a quiet space for people to kind of think about our troubled relationship with the larger natural world. And the next slides will come in a little closer on that centerpiece that I kind of think is the altarpiece of my sanctuary, and then some of these altered books that are down below. Next. This piece is made of wood. I went up into the Santa Cruz Mountains, and in 2020, sadly, we had an enormous wildfire there. Over 90,000 acres burned, over 900 houses burned. And I took this wood, so these are the charred remnants of trees from that wildfire. And I almost think of it as a little family group here. And the one on the right, I covered with copper leaf. And above is sort of a solar circle, a disc, and over it there's a copper mesh that I created. And you'll be seeing other images that kind of reflect on this. It's sort of a symbol of connectivity and how the ecosystem works together. So you'll see how that kind of image appears in my work over and over. That disc took 50 hours for me to make, but who's counting? So if you come see the show, come take a gander at it before you go. Okay, next. these are altered books down below. This is what I'm calling the Library of Life. And this book has an anatomically correct model of a threatened frog in California. And I put it in this sort of, kind of lush environment there. And so these books, I'm calling some of them memorial field guides. So for those of you who have been involved with nature, a field guide is a book you get and you can see what different types of frogs or birds or so on are there. And as many of you probably know, amphibians are one of the first species that would start having a global collapse. And we could bring them back if we changed our chemistry, protected their habitats, and we're much more careful when we went and visited them. It turns out the biologists were transporting around a fungus from one group to another that was killing them off. So next slide, please. This is the Memorial Field Guide to the Birds. And I often read that we have lost 3 billion birds since 1970. I would say that's a little soft pedaling it. We have annihilated 3 billion birds here in America, I'm afraid, since the 1970s. And so this altered book, they become kind of like sculptures, and the surface of it is covered with bird feathers. And then I made this little nest, but I made it out of this wire, this very sophisticated technological wire. And this actually has a happy side to the story. The wetland birds are coming back. Their numbers are increasing. And why is that? Because we're protecting wetlands and we're restoring wetlands. So nature is a regenerative force. And if we make room for nature to do its thing, it can come back so quickly that it's been astonishing to a lot of biologists. Next. And this is the last of the altered books I'm going to show you. And this is a memorial field guide to the human heart. And sometimes I feel that the way we treat nature, we're not showing a lot of caring. And so I created this, and that has a surface underneath it of human hair. And it's actually my hair from when I was 14 years old and got a long hank of hair cut off. I discovered it in my studio. Couldn't believe that I've been dragging it around for all these decades. But, it created this wonderful pattern underneath there. So I used a lot of different materials, animal hair, various natural materials for the altered books. So it would be great if you can come in, if you have a chance, come in and see the show before October 2nd when it will be closing. Next. And this is a little shift here, but I wanted to show you kind of how I got to that point. And this is 1989 when I was in Berlin. And I was focused more on socio-political work at that point, and knew I was going to be staying in Berlin, and created this writing on the wall. I gathered the hopes and fears of ordinary people from East Berlin, West Berlin, and America, inscribed them in these plates, and let people who are divided by the wall speak together about their basic concerns. So it was a little tiny challenge to the wall itself. And the men that you see here are from East Berlin, which at the time was a very effective and harsh military police state. And so he's videotaping the piece, and these 3 men are standing in a defensive unit, and just over the border, which is at the front man's feet, are 150 people watching. And it was very tense. That man turned around with the camera and appeared to be videotaping the crowd. Of course, in East Berlin, they had a large percentage of their population under surveillance. And these are the Stasi, the secret police of East Germany. Next. This shows the hopes and fears. And this is the first time I used copper. The hopes were on copper. And the reason why this kind of applies to my eco work is when I was there, I asked a man, you know, like, what do you think the future is for East Germany? And he said, oh, it's hopeless. It'll be another 2,000 years before Honecker and this government are swept away. Another 2,000 years or 6 months. In 6 months, Die Wende occurred and the wall fell. So this gives me hope that sometimes our problems seem so entrenched, literally cast in concrete, but there can be these sudden reversals like occurred at the Berlin Wall. Next. When I returned home, I was invited to do a public art piece, and this is called Ecotech. Ecotech was my word for creating a system of manufacturing and chemical engineering that would be biocompatible. Obviously, that's not currently the case. And wouldn't it be great if all of the work we did was guided by biology and not by the hard sciences? So I took a very large boulder, cut it into 4 1-foot thick slabs. So that was kind of like holistic thinking, you know, seeing the parts in the whole. Next. And I embedded in it solar symbols. And then the big symbol you see right here is called the holocoenotic theory of environmental complexity. And it was developed by Professor W.D. Billings. We're going to see it again in a moment. Next. So this is a copy of his original drawing. I was very privileged to talk to him before he passed, and he gave me permission to use his image. He drew this in his little basement office at Duke University. And all the forces and substances and beings that act and interact to create a living ecosystem are on the outside of the circle. He was a botanist, so he put a plant in the middle, but it's pretty much the same for each one of us. So you can put your own name right in the middle. And so there's soil, animals, humans, temperature, radiation, water, fire, gravity, all the various forces and substances, and then the lines in between show the relationship between these various forces and substances. So for me, it's like a beautiful representation of the web of life. And I feel that if we really deeply understood this illustration, we would live in profoundly different ways, because when we looked at water, we would see our blood. When we looked at the air, we would see the inside of our lungs and again, our blood. So, you know, and obviously food and water. We're so deeply woven into this web of life. And it's at once somewhat resilient, but also somewhat fragile as we're testing the bounds today. Next. So I came home and I was given a show at the Desessé Museum at Santa Clara University. And this is one of 3 installations I created. This was called Project Nexus. Nexus are connections. And I created a 3-dimensional model of Professor W.D. Billings' drawing there. And for the plant, as you can see, I projected that above, I created the burning bush. So that's actually a sculpture that I created with the human heart there. And that was because Santa Clara is a Christian Catholic university. And the burning bush is one of the few times a plant was representing the divine. And for me, the natural world is the face of the divine. Next. I worked with text to create this. How do you create these lines in space? Working with various people, I finally came to using piano technology. So it became a musical instrument, and students created compositions to play on it. And you can see the beads, those are the photons going out from the sun. So I was trying to help people understand a holistic view of our ecosystems. Next. This is the cover of my book, Nature Speaks, Art and Poetry for the Earth. And I got 6 book awards, to humble brag a little bit on that. But I just kind of plunged in. I wanted to kind of access a new audience, and it kind of gave me a springboard to talk to people. Next. It was set up so that I had these brown ink drawings, some of them very intricately done. We had a brown, illustration. So the original brown inks were all made from soil. It was art and poetry for the earth. And then I would have a poem and a short essay. So this gave me a way to go and talk to audiences. I'd show the images and then read the poems, discuss the environmental issues. And I'm calling for the Green Enlightenment. So we have the environmental movement, but the Green Enlightenment for me would be a social and cultural movement that would suffuse our entire culture. I think it must start with reconciliation. That's admitting the harms that you've done and pledging to stop doing them. And then restoration, fixing the harms you've done. And then we will see regeneration. Once you stop harming nature, it will leap back with such vigor if you haven't taken it down to zero. So the original Enlightenment, its meme was dare to think. And we need that. We need to recommit to science and logic and reason. And I think we also need to dare to care. So to really care about the larger natural environment and understand our dependence on the larger natural environment. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Deborah, and thank you, Shannon. And before we go on, we've come to our favorite part in the program, which is where you guys get to ask each other questions, which may be difficult because you work together on a regular basis. But if there's something that you haven't asked, or that, that someone from the audience would like to ask you, that would be great.
Well, I have a question to start off for Shannon. And you've started this remarkable verdancy project and developed it in such a short period of time. I'm just kind of in awe of all you do, not only your art and having a family and then developing this wonderful residency program. I'm wondering how that's, kind of what are some of the interesting ideas you've learned from interacting with all these people who have come? And is that influencing your art in some ways?
Oh, thanks you, Deborah, very much. It has. It's, one of the reasons I'm calling it a project, because I feel that it's going to keep growing and evolving and responding to the artists who come here. And so I kind of had no expectations. Like I knew what the type of people I wanted to attract and what my love for this project is, but it's been so satisfying and it's really exceeded my expectations, even though I didn't have a lot. One of the things though that I have learned from a lot of the artists and myself and doing this is, and it's really kind of become an important part of this verdancy project, is for artists to have time without expectations. We, especially I feel like now with social media, we're always expected to produce. What's your project? What are you making? What are you working on? But artists need time to think and gestate and plant seeds and experiment. But every time you're expected to post on social media multiple times a day or a week, it interrupts that time. So one of the things that I really try to convey to the artists that come here, and it's also such a good reminder for myself, is to just do nothing, just to be present, to gestate and plant those seeds And we don't have any expectations of the artists. I make that very clear, and I give them this permission. And a lot of times what ends up happening is they end up actually being very productive, but because they let go of those expectations of what they should be doing, they actually open themselves up to so many more possibilities. And that's been really satisfying. And again, it's a constant reminder for myself to just be present and let these ideas grow inside of me. And maybe they won't come to fruition for a few years, but they need that time to really grow. So. And Deborah, for you, I have a question. You know, I really admire all the different materials and mediums that you use, but I'm wondering if there's one that's like, you know, a favorite that you kind of go back to over and over again, or something that's kind of like a foundational medium for you.
Copper is very foundational, as you say, and I used it on the Berlin Wall first, and so I had hopes and fears from ordinary people from East Berlin, West Berlin, and America, and that was quite a tale, just collecting all of those. Going over to East Berlin, before I went, people said, okay, don't do it in the large squares. They have cameras everywhere. They gave me addresses of little cafes to go to. And so I had to be very careful about that. And then I had all the hopes and fears written down, hidden in my coat as I came back over the border. A little nervous. The woman ahead of me, they just like took her apart, but I passed through very well. And so the hopes were on copper because copper, we use it for pots, we use it for jewelry, but copper also is an essential metal that every living creature has to have copper to remain vital. Mm-hmm. So it's a part of all of us and part of all of life on the planet, as far as we know. And so, that's what it represents for me. Brass, when I was a little girl, we had a brass shell from World War I. And so it was spun, and, it's a colder, harder metal. And that was, not the metal that I ended up using. So I've used copper leaf quite a bit. My mother did toll work, and she used gold leaf. And so when I was a little girl, one time I started going into her stuff, and so I pulled out this little booklet and I opened it up, and this leaf, this gold leaf, got blown away by the register was blowing hot air. And here's this thing dancing in the air, this shimmering piece of metal. Now, oh my gosh, and I clapped and shook and I put it away. And so I adore copper leaf. It's extremely thin and just a beautiful, beautiful material. So I use that, and I use copper wire in my installation, but I also have animal hair, human hair, clay, wood, metal, I love to just explore different materials as I go.
Great. Great. And we're running out of time, unfortunately. So I'd like to take this time to see if any of our other guests would like to ask a question of our two artists. No one out in the audience?
Mary Jean, you just need to, oh, there you go.
I figured it out. I had to unmute myself. Hello. I've known Deborah since our kids were in preschool together and admired her work for many years. And I just wondered, Deborah, what brought you to the poetry? Was it so that you could communicate in a different way? Because I know you've used words in your art, over the years, but not poems until recently when you wrote the book. So tell me a little bit about how you came to poetry and how that enhances or fits in with the other work.
My grandfather was a poet, so, it didn't seem something so far out of reach to me. And I found that at art openings sometimes, everybody's standing there with their glass of wine. This is before COVID. and like, hey, wow, that's great. That's really pretty, you know. And I'm so focused on on ideas, you know, I'd be going like, no, listen, this is about hormone disruption. This is what's going on, you know? And so, you know, I really wanted to communicate a little more directly with people about these ideas that I was researching and learning about. And I thought, you know, poetry, people might sit and listen. And my book was published by White Cloud Press. And it was very exciting to be able to, and I did this sort of hybrid thing, which was at the time, now hybrid poetry is like something people look for. But at that point, you know, you doing art and then the poetry and essays. I think my poetry book is probably the only poetry book in the world that has 7 pages of citations. I want people to know this was not just my personal opinion. Thank you.
Okay, well, I would love to find out what happens next, but I think we're just going to have to keep tuned to see what the Terra Art Collective is doing next. We have your book, and I think we can go to Shannon's residency, right, to find out. And you both have websites, which is wonderful. To move on beyond that, I'd like to talk about what happens next here. And the Artists Exchange was created to provide a platform for artists to be able to share and to learn. Particularly, we started it during the beginning of COVID. We wanted people to have the experience, which they could not have, of being in the studio and seeing what others were doing. So it's still a forum for finding out about various techniques and opportunities for artists. So if you have an opportunity that you'd like to share, an opportunity to be in a show or to see a show or whatever else, please take this time to share it. Actually, I'm going to call on Shelley first because she is our figurehead of Gallery Route 1.
Thanks, Pamela. We are always looking for new artist members at the gallery, and we're a nonprofit art gallery. We have all kinds of really wonderful outreach programs that we present, and of course, we hope to inspire the people to see the world in new ways. And I think learning about the kind of things that artists like the Terra Art Collective bring to Gallery Route 1 is a really special part of that. And we are accepting applications through, I believe, the end of December. I'm sorry, let me check my notes. The deadline to become a member artist is December 31st, and I will pop a link to that in the chat. If you are interested, you can check that out. And also just want to mention that we will be opening up applications to our fellowship program very soon. And so keep an eye out for that. That's for younger artists, age 21 through 40, I believe. And so we are preparing to open up those applications very soon, but I don't have a date for that yet. All right.
Keep watching. Keep your eyes on the target. Let's see. If you are interested in of course, Shelley just told you how to apply, but if you are interested in appearing on this program, or you know of an artist who would particularly have a lot to share and benefit from it, please send me an email Pamela Blotner at gmail.com. And if you're moved by today's performance, I should say that this whole program is our gift to you. So if you feel like helping us out a little bit, please do. We have a button, don't we, Shelley? I cannot see from here.
I just added a link in the chat. So if people are moved to donate, they can click on the link and drop a donation to the Artists Exchange.
Good. There, yeah, that's what I meant to say. Yeah. And I want to say that next month we do produce a show every month, and sometimes we can make it fit in with the show that we have up at the time. Sometimes we don't. Next month is going to be, there are going to be 2 artists. Only one of them am I certain of, so I'm going to withhold the names of both of them. But the show is going to be called The Price of Silence. And it's the work of 2 artists whose mixed media works straddle the line between memory dreaming and temporal space. And so you get to figure out what memory dreaming and temporal space is. But in the meantime, I think that that's about all that we have for you. Again, to thank Deborah and Shannon, and to remind you that we are open and we have the closing of the show coming up.
I noticed that Dale Larson has a hand raised, but I do want to also acknowledge Leah J., who's in the room. She is a member of Terra Arts Collective, and just based on the structure of our Artist Exchange events, we are only highlighting 2 artists, but in fact, Leah J. and Michelle also are part of the Terra Arts Collective. Dale, what did you want to say? Go ahead and unmute.
I was just applauding.
Oh, very nice. All right. Do you want to add anything, Leah?
Just real quick, I want to say thank you, Shelley and everyone, Deborah and Shannon, of course, and just say thanks. It's been a really great show for me. Great is a bad adjective. It is not very descriptive. It's been a big deal for me. I've been in shows before, but this is probably one of the best ones. So I'm very happy to be showing with all of you and for this opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah, and if anyone who's attending tonight has not yet seen the exhibit, it's closing this Sunday. So this is your last chance to get in there and take a look. And Michelle's piece on the back wall is interactive, so you can add to it. And I always enjoy things like that. And of course, Deborah's having a talk at the closing at the end of the day. We did take reservations for that, and they've all been filled. But we're all looking forward to that as well.
And once again, thank you so much for coming, and keep your finger on our pulse. You never know who's going to show up again, and who new is going to show up. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. Yes, it's been marvelous. Great to see you all. Thanks so much for coming, Mary Jean.
All right, and we'll hopefully see you at our next Artist Exchange on October 19th.